Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to Paisano's Music and Vinyl Talk. Team Paisano in full force.
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, Genevieve. Make sure the volume is turned up so it plays back nice and loud.
up.
Hey, don't talk to that
You're the one
cat like
screaming
that.
at her the entire
I was
day.
not.
Yes,
You're
you
the
are.
monster, not
Whoa!
me.
You're always screaming at her.
I'm
I
not the
don't wanna
bad
hear
guy.
it.
You are. Let's talk about Van Halen and their last studio album with David Lee Roth until 2012, A Different Kind of Truth. But for all intents and purposes, this is the last Van Halen album with David Lee Roth. It came out in 1980. Actually, it was recorded in 1983. It was released January 9th, 1984. And it is their sixth studio album. They made 6 studio albums with David Lee Roth between 1978 and 1984. This is the last album, obviously, with the original group. They ended up canning Michael Anthony somewhere along the way, too, which was a real crime. But, yeah, after this, it ushered in the Van Hagar years with Sammy Hagar doing the singing. And it wasn't Van Halen anymore. I mean, Eddie will always be Eddie, but the songs, major shift. Major shift. But they did what they thought was right. Who am I to argue? Just a fan, right? Just a lowly fan. Now, there was something. Oh, this had several huge monster hits. 4 of them, actually. And they all had videos in the dawning of the MTV era. And in the video for Hot for Teacher, there's a little, before the music starts, there's a little scenario being played out where David Lee Roth is a bus driver. And there's this geek by the name of Waldo that gets on the bus. And there is a, "Sit down, Waldo." And I have a friend, Wally, that we call Waldo. And everyone used to say, "Sit down, Waldo." We didn't know what they were talking about because the opposite side of town that I lived on had cable and thus had MTV as part of that cable 2 years before we did. So we didn't get to see this video till it was like a year old. And they weren't even, it was so old that nobody was even saying "Sit down, Waldo" anymore. But we're like, what is this "Sit down, Waldo" junk? We soon found out, after the fact, of course. But this album is heavily criticized for Eddie Van Halen with his synthesizer. The synthesizer plays a role in at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these tunes. And but there's for every synthesizer tune, there's always an Eddie solo in there. So I don't know what people are griping about. It's not 1978 anymore, or 1979. Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2 are masterpieces, and that's what they are. The band is obviously gonna branch out and do different things. You can't make the same album every time, like AC/DC pretty much made the same album every time, but sold millions with every album. I can't explain it. They just had the knack, but most bands, 99.9% of bands, do not have that luxury. They have to evolve. And Van Halen did they switched things up from time to time. And this was by far the biggest. I kind of drew a wedge in between David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen. David Lee Roth wasn't a big fan of the synth, but the synth songs were huge, Jump starts with, first it has that intro. The track listing does not appear on the album, the album or the liner notes at all. So I have to look at the actual album. It came out on Warner Brothers. I bought this, I don't know, it might be an original, but originals of this aren't worth anything. Everybody bought them back in the day. They're a dime a dozen. Came out on Warner Brothers. But before we talk about the track listing, let's talk about subscriptions.
No.
If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about...
Rock and roll.
Thank you, John Viev. We talk about rock and roll. Well said, my dear. And if you've been watching for some time and leeching, you're a leech.
Just get out.
Leeching
No one
would
wants you
suggest
here.
leech-like behavior, right? You wouldn't be leeching if you weren't a leech, now would you? And that's what you're doing. And I don't like it. Neither does Jean Viev, and neither does Raven, who lives in the basement now.
Get her
You don't want to
out.
anger the cat.
No one wants
You don't
here.
want to anger the cat. Let me
Let's
tell
get
you,
rid of
she's
her.
a rough customer. All right, here's that track listing I was promising you. 1984, which clocks in at 1:07. That's a little synth exercise by Edward Van Halen. And that goes straight into Jump, which is one of the... Toilet flushing upstairs, delightful. One of the synthesizer tunes that people criticize so much. It was a huge video, it was a huge song, and I believe it got to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. I think it was their only #1 song. And they follow that up with a straight-up rocker, Panama. There's no synths on Panama. It's a straight rock and roll song, true Van Halen tune. Followed by Top Jimmy, which is a great song. You never hear it on the radio. And side one finishes with Drop Dead Legs, which is another song you never hear on the radio. But even the album filler for Van Halen was fantastic. Side two, the great drum intro and the great guitar intro for Hot for Teacher. Great video. I'll Wait, another huge hit. Huge hit. Features the synthesizer. Followed by Girl Gone Bad, could be classified as album filler, and House of Pain finishes side two, which could be described as album filler. But like I said, album filler for Van Halen was better than 95% of what was out there. A great band. Edward Van Halen is no longer with us, and it's a real shame. Died way too young. And, you know, David Lee Roth, he still makes his appearances on talk shows and podcasts, and he's just one of the great characters of rock and roll still to this day. What a band, what a time to be alive. Tune in on Monday night, and Jean Viev will draw another album for review. Hopefully she'll be well rested on Monday night.
The trenches for this stuff.
The trenches being a huge purple blanket. That's the trenches. Yeah, that's Jean Viev's definition of the trench. Yeah.
No, Ray Ray's in the trenches too.
Ray is in the trenches down here in the rock and roll dungeon with Paisano. I agree. Now there's some imaging that came here. The record sleeve has split and is in awful shape. But there's a picture of the band as they appeared in 1984. One of the greatest American rock bands of all time. Definitely top 2 or 3 in my opinion. Alrighty. Like I said, tune in Monday night. We'll draw another album. And we will rock on in the dungeon.
No.
Until then, YouTube, thank you and good night.
Bye, queens.